We continue our journey in artificial life and biologically inspired algorithms, but before I finally tell you about evolutionary algorithms, let's have a quick recap about what I have told you about optimization so far. We started with this picture, a very important one. When you see real-world examples of optimization problems, their models, perhaps mathematical models, and optimization algorithms. And I gave you an example of pizza delivery or any kind of delivery where we have to move and visit some set of locations. And another example was actually drilling holes in boards, like in electronics, where this drilling head had to move around a set of points. And obviously, since we want to conserve energy and to have this drilling finished as soon as possible, we are also, just as in the case of pizza delivery, we are also interested in minimizing the total length of this route of the drilling head. So we have the same model of these two problems, TSP, traveling salesperson. Even though drilling head doesn't look like a person, it's still the same mathematical model. So this is the first example of this power of optimization. And then we had those general optimization algorithms. And so far, I told you about 6 or 7 of them. So let's pause here and try to enumerate what optimization algorithms we talked about so far. I said 6 or 7, but some of them are not so practical and efficient. There was this exhaustive algorithm, which would check all the solutions, and it's not practical, especially for those hard problems where you would need to evaluate and to consider a large number, probably exponentially large number of solutions. Then we had a random algorithm, which is practical because we can finish it or stop it anytime we want, but at the same time it's extremely inefficient. It just tries solutions randomly. We had a heuristic approach, and I mentioned that heuristics are not so interesting for us because of this tiny text. You remember this tiny text? We don't want to be experts in every domain where we apply optimization. So we don't want to learn heuristics for every domain of life. Then we had local search in 2 variants, greedy and steepest, and we had taboo search and simulated annealing. So quite a few algorithms. Then I gave you examples of many practical problems, also here, and this, and this, and this, and even this. And this plot was so important because it showed that after we built a model of this real-world problem, from the point of view of the optimization algorithm, we are actually only thinking about this space of solutions. We don't need to be concerned about the specifics of the real-world problem and even about the specifics of this model, mathematical model or formal model of the problem, even though actually if we want our algorithm to be very efficient, we should care about the specifics of the model. But so far, let's assume that we don't have to think about it. So we are actually only thinking about some abstract space of solutions. Now you see this difference between the set and the space. All the solutions constitute a set, but not only a set, also a space, because we have some topology, because you saw that those neighborhood algorithms like local search and simulated annealing and taboo search, they all need neighborhood. So some solutions are neighbors and some solutions are not neighbors. Hence we have this space. And these more general and efficient algorithms like local search, taboo search, simulated annealing, even evolutionary algorithms are called meta-heuristics. So they are just like heuristics because there is some heuristic idea behind them, the idea that makes them efficient, but they are meta-heuristics because heuristics are dedicated to single individual problems, and meta-heuristics are more general. They can be applied to most optimization problems. So we are thinking about this landscape and multidimensional space of solutions, and this is where we start our evolutionary algorithms experience. Let's see where we finished. We talked about this, and now we start evolutionary algorithms. It is often said that evolutionary computation in general as a field, it's the name of the field which is concerned with evolutionary optimization and a few other more general topics. It's at the intersection of evolutionary biology and computer science. And probably this is a good approximation of what actually happens in this evolutionary computation research field. Of course, it is inspired by evolutionary biology and by the evolutionary processes we know from biology, but at the same time, there may be a problem with proving whether evolutionary algorithms were really inspired by evolution. It's the same with neural networks and human brain. Do we really know, and are we really sure, and can we really prove that first scientists who proposed this idea, either the idea of evolutionary optimization or the idea of artificial neural networks, really wanted to build a model of a human brain or of real, natural evolutionary processes? Not necessarily. They could be mathematicians, for example, who had a completely different inspiration as to how to build and how to develop and what building blocks those algorithms should have. Anyway, within this evolutionary computation field, we have a number of specific algorithms: genetic algorithms, evolution strategies, evolutionary programming, genetic programming, classifier systems, and genetic-based machine learning. We will talk about the cognitive architecture here and later on as well. And various coevolutionary architectures we will not talk about in this class. So first of all, you should pay attention to those names because they may be misleading because of their similarity. Look, you have genetic, you have evolution, evolutionary, programming, genetic, programming, similar words, even though each of those names means a slightly different algorithm. So do not get confused and do not get those names mixed up when you think about specific algorithms. As to applications of evolutionary algorithms, they are obviously the same as any optimization algorithm because evolutionary algorithms are the example of the optimization algorithm. So you can use them for the same applications as local search, tabu search, simulated annealing, exhaustive, and so on. Also, since we are talking about artificial life, those algorithms can be used not only to optimize, but also to model some aspects of biology. You remember that in artificial life we have those two kinds of applications. One application is helping biology understand complex processes, another is helping computer science to solve difficult problems efficiently. So this is solving difficult problems efficiently, and this is helping understand biological processes. Before we even start talking about the details of those algorithms, think about how would you imagine such evolutionary optimization. You know how local search works. You know how evolution works in real life. I will give you a hint that we need to think about a population of solutions. In every other algorithm we talked about so far, we only had a single solution at a time. In local search, simulated annealing, tabu search, we only were thinking about a single solution at a time. Now we have a set of solutions at a time. So we are somehow processing a set of solutions, just like in nature we have a population of some creatures. So this is one hint. And now, how would you ensure that this population improves over time? What is needed? What do you think is needed for evolution to work? Think about it. Try to actually design or develop some evolutionary algorithm of your own. Remember what you already have. You have a set of solutions. You have a space of solutions, so you have this neighborhood relation, and you have the ability to evaluate any solution. You have the ability to change every solution because you jump from a solution to their neighbor. So this is what you have. Maybe you are missing something, but from those building blocks, try to build your own evolutionary algorithm. Let's pause. Our first kind of evolutionary algorithms is genetic algorithms. So you remember this list here. We start with GA, genetic algorithms. And how they are characterized? Their specific feature is that every solution is encoded with zeros and ones. So it's a binary vector. And it's quite unfortunate that we would need to do this always, because if, of course, we have an optimization problem where the natural representation is zeros and ones, for example, we have a selection problem where each bit says whether we want to choose something or not, then the vector of zeros and ones is perfectly appropriate. And then we would be very happy to employ genetic algorithms. But in other cases, like for example, we have a permutation, why and how would we need to encode a permutation as a vector of zeros and ones? Could we do this? Sure, because we are using computers, and in computer memory everything is zeros and ones. But it has some other consequences. When we convert or encode our permutation into a set of zeros and ones or a vector, then we somehow no longer remember that behind those zeros and ones we still have a permutation. And if we start changing those zeros and ones, our permutation, which is behind those zeros and ones, is no longer valid, right? It's no longer correct. It's no longer a permutation if we change some bit. So this makes things obfuscated and complicated, unnecessarily complicated. So for a long time, people thought that they should encode every problem into binary in order to use evolutionary optimization in general. But it's not true, and you should not do this. It will be complicated, inefficient, and probably the performance of your optimization will also suffer because of this. Let's read what we have here. All genotypes are binary vectors of the same fixed length. This is another requirement which is not natural, because in some optimization problems you may encounter situations where your solutions need to store variable amount of information. So there may be simpler solutions and more complex solutions. And the requirement of using genetic algorithms, at least in their purest form, traditional form, is that every individual needs to have the same length. So this may be a restriction or not, depending on your problem. If the optimization problem requires a different representation, for example a permutation, then solutions need encoding, decoding, and sometimes repair. Repair because sometimes we will break this assumption of being a proper permutation. And then we have to do something with this permutation for it to become the actual proper permutation, because otherwise it wouldn't be a permutation. Genetic operators are unaware of the original representation of solutions, so they can be the same for every optimization problem. This is the advantage of genetic algorithms. If, for example, you want to change a binary string, you simply flip a bit. For example, you change a bit. And you can do this no matter what was encoded into this binary vector. But the problem is, like mentioned earlier, then you may break the validity or some constraints that were imposed on the original representation of the solution. Like, for example, a permutation needs to be a permutation, and you cannot flip bits whenever you want. Compare this to nature. Very different species, the same basic code. Okay, so there may be some analogy of this in nature when we have ATGC, and we can actually build a human or build a flower, right? Or build a virus or a bacteria. Everything shares the same code. So in this regard, genetic algorithms, or this idea to encode everything into binary, actually could make sense. But I told you why it's not a good idea in optimization, or at least in our engineering realm, where we want everything to be as simple as possible and as efficient as possible and understandable to a human. We don't want to have a convoluted network of interactions between bits and so on, and some complex repair mechanisms when we want to avoid this complexity altogether. Now let's talk about algorithm structure and its parameters. Main loop. We initialize our time counter, let's call it a time variable. Initialize P of t. This capital P means a population. So we have a set of solutions and somehow we need to initialize them. How to initialize solutions? Actually, it's the same problem as with any earlier optimization algorithm like local search, simulated annealing, tabu search. We always needed some initial solution, and the easiest thing to do is to initialize this solution randomly. So ensure that this solution is valid, but it could be maybe created by some heuristic as well. But in this algorithm, in genetic algorithms and in all evolutionary algorithms, you need a population. So you usually simply initialize your first population or zeroth population by generating all individuals randomly. Let's say you need 50 or 100 individuals. So you initialize them randomly. You evaluate them. So you call this evaluation function, and you remember this landscape. You have a population of random solutions and you evaluate each solution. So now you know how good they are. And then there is this main loop. While not stopping condition, a stopping condition could be, as usual, some number of steps without improvement. Increase this time counter, select a new population from the previous population or from the current population, modify the population somehow, and evaluate again. This is the same evaluation as we used earlier. So we select some subset of solutions from the existing set, we modify them a little bit, and we evaluate them. Then again, we select, modify, and evaluate. And you have probably heard that in nature, in natural evolution, we have some selection process which makes some creatures or some individuals reproduce faster than others. And maybe some solutions, some individuals are unable to reproduce at all because, for example, they are eaten before they can even reproduce. So this is this selective pressure, the way selection is supposed to work, to reproduce better individuals faster or reproduce them more than poorer individuals or poorer solutions. As you can see, this definition of the algorithm is a little bit more complex than, for example, simulated annealing or tabu search. And we have many aspects of this algorithm, many mechanisms, where it seems that we have some choice. You could think, okay, but how? How do I do this? How exactly do I do this? So now think about this piece of code and think about in which locations, in which functions, in what places in this code you actually have some choice. Like you have to adjust some parameter, or you have to decide which mechanisms you actually want to use in this specific place. Where are your free choices and free adjustments and some hidden parameters maybe in this definition of the algorithm? Write them down on a piece of paper or in some notepad maybe. Let's pause. We need to decide what should be the population size, how often we should cross over our individuals. We didn't talk about crossing over, but we know it happens in nature. Crossing over is hidden in this modification part. We need to decide about the probability of mutation and how to mutate if we have different ideas on how to mutate. Choosing the stopping condition. Okay, I mentioned what the stopping condition could be. Choosing the selection mechanisms, positive and possibly negative. Select. This is important. How to select better individuals more often than poor individuals. Adjusting parameter values of the selection mechanisms. So we have different choices for the selection mechanism itself. And then we have a choice of parameters of the one that we actually decided to use. Okay, so it's a complex step, apparently. And now we have a simple demonstration. This is this simple app that we already visited earlier. So you remember this page, we click on a button, and this is our app where we can choose and even write down our own optimization function. We choose the algorithm, which can be evolutionary. We can even adjust some parameters, and we can run it and see how our population converges in some hopefully good region of solutions, close to the global optimum if we are lucky. So spend some time playing with this algorithm, with its parameters as well, and maybe with some functions that you can devise on your own. This algorithm can be used in two architectures, and one is called steady state and the other is called generational. What's the difference? Have a look. This is our population of solutions, and this green part or greenish part is the actual solution encoded, for example, zeros and ones. This is a vector of zeros and ones, different for every individual. This is a single individual. I say individual and it's the same as a solution. But we are speaking about evolution, so we often say that solutions are individuals. We sometimes also say that this is a genotype. A genotype, by this we mean some genetic representation of a solution, which in computer science means the contents of memory or some structure in a programming language. For example, in some low-level language, when you define a vector of binary numbers, zeros and ones, you know that in computer memory, they will be grouped into bytes so that you will have, for example, 8 bits in a byte. But if you use Python, for example, very high level and inefficient language, then when you create a list of zeros and ones, they will be probably stored as individual objects, where each object is a number, or maybe numbers, but not necessarily so that every 0 and 1 takes only 1 bit in computer memory. They may even take like 32 bits, for example. So 31 bits will be lost for this. And this red part is the evaluation, the value, the quality of this particular individual. And when we speak about evolutionary algorithms, we speak often about fitness. So this is the individual or the genotype or the solution and its fitness. Fitnesses are in this red part. When I talked about this landscape, I sometimes said it's a fitness landscape. Okay? It's an optimization landscape in this slide, but fitness landscape is a very popular term. It comes from evolutionary algorithms because this fitness word is typical for evolution, but this name fitness landscape is also used in other algorithms sometimes, like in local search, which has nothing to do with evolution. So this is our population. And I mentioned that we have two architectures, steady state and generational. How is generational architecture of evolutionary algorithm defined? We have a current population. For example, T is 123. So it's 123rd iteration of the algorithm. And we need to produce, by this selection step, we need to produce another population. A new population from the current one. So we create a new population from the current one. And we have a new population and then we forget about the current one and we repeat our steps using this new population. At some point this new population becomes the current population and we produce again a new population and we forget about the previous one and so on and so on and so on. This is called generational because each population constitutes a generation. First generation, second generation, third generation, and so on. And a generation has as many individuals as is our population size. Whereas in this other kind or other architecture of evolutionary algorithm, we don't need to create the entire new population. This other architecture is called steady state. And steady state means that the population is more steady and you only exchange a small part of the population. In the extreme case, you only exchange a single individual. So in this extreme case of steady state, the entire population is unchanged. You only select one new individual, you modify it, you evaluate it, and you include this new individual back to the population. If you want your population size to remain constant, then when you include a new individual, you need to remove some other individual. And this is negative selection. because you not only needed to decide whom to choose to modify, this was positive selection, then you need to decide whom to kill to make a free place for this new individual. Okay? And now that you understand what's the difference between steady state and generational, steady state, only a small part changes. Generational, we need to generate the entire population in every generation. Think about what would be the difference in behavior of those two architectures. In optimization, how would their effect or their performance change, or how would it differ? There is some key difference. Maybe think about very large populations, like 10,000 individuals. Let's assume that you have 10,000 individuals at a time. And you have a generational approach and this steady state approach. How would the performance of the algorithm in time differ? What would be different? Think about what happens when some mutation or some change in an individual created a very good individual. How those two approaches differ. Think about two things. Assume you are lucky and your algorithm randomly created a very nice, very good solution by chance, by randomly mutating some existing individual. And at the same time, think about this selection process. How those two interplay or interact in generational approach and in steady state approach. It may take some time, but the difference is very important. So let's pause and think about it. The difference is that in generational approach, you have these artificial pauses when the algorithm works. So when you are creating a new population, after your current population is evaluated already, you somehow freeze in time. So if you have 10,000 individuals, you need to select 10,000 other individuals and maybe mutate them and evaluate them and maybe cross over and whatnot. But you are still basing your process on this state from the past or from the current moment. Anyway, you have still the population of 10,000 individuals. Whereas in this steady state approach, you have the population of 10,000 individuals. You select one, maybe you mutate, you cross over, you do something with it. You include it back into this population. Maybe you kill one individual to keep the population size constant. But at the next step, next operation, you already have this new individual, this fresh, the most recent individual in the population. So you can immediately use it. In particular, you can select this very individual just created for the next operation. When it was so good, for example, that you discovered some super good solution, then you can immediately use it again to mutate it again or to cross over with some other solution. Okay? You wouldn't be able to do this with this generational approach. If you generated a super individual, one of these 10,000 new individuals, so what? You still need to fill in many free places in this new population, maybe even 9999 places, if this was your first lucky shot, based on the previous or this current state, and you cannot use this new solution that you have just discovered. Okay? So in this regard, this generational approach seems inefficient and artificial, whereas this steady state approach is very smooth and is very fast. So we say that it converges faster because it is able to use immediately new information or information about new solutions. Of course, this steady state approach doesn't mean that you need to work on one individual. As I mentioned, this steady state approach only requires that you work on a part of the population, not the entire population. But in the simplest extreme, you only process one individual at a time. And I really encourage you to use this steady state approach because it's smooth, it's simple, it converges fast, and you don't have these artificial stages or generations where your population is frozen, or your information or access to new information is frozen in time. Okay? During the next presentation, we will speak about selection, because it's a very probably the key moment in evolutionary algorithm. This is the moment where the algorithm actually wants to optimize. Without selection, it wouldn't want to optimize. This is how we promote good solutions in evolutionary optimization. So see you in the next video.